They saw a black woman in a hoodie sitting in a luxury car and assumed she didn't belong. They thought her silence was defiance, and her knowledge of the law was talking back. Officer Brad Miller and Sergeant Hank Davison made the mistake of a lifetime when they slapped handcuffs on General Althea Robinson, a 4-star general in the United States Army and a top strategist for the Pentagon. They thought they were arresting a suspect. They didn't know they were declaring war on the Department of Defense. Watch until the end to see the moment the station doors fly open, the federal MPs swarm the building, and 2 arrogant careers turn to dust in seconds. This is the story of how one phone call ended it all. The engine of the obsidian black Mercedes-Benz S-Class hummed quietly, keeping the climate control steady against the humid Virginia heat. Inside, General Althea Robinson sat with the posture of a woman who had spent 30 years commanding rooms that most people were afraid to even enter. Today, however, she wasn't commanding anything. She was waiting for her niece, Maya, to finish a job interview at the boutique law firm across the street. Althea checked her watch, a battered tactical garment that looked out of place against her civilian attire. She was dressed down, a simple grey university hoodie, dark joggers and running shoes. No stars on her shoulders, no ribbons on her chest, just Althea. She picked up her phone to check a briefing sent by Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin's office. It was a habit she couldn't break. Even on her day off, the security of the nation buzzed in her pocket. A sharp rap on the driver's side window broke her concentration. Althea didn't flinch. She slowly turned her head. Through the tinted glass, she saw the distorted reflection of a badge and the aggressive stance of a police officer. He was young, likely in his mid-20s, with a buzz cut that was a little too long on top to be military regulation, and sunglasses that cost more than his weekly paycheck. This was Officer Brad Miller. Althea lowered the window. She didn't roll it all the way down, just enough to be heard. "Can I help you, officer?" "Turn off the engine and step out of the vehicle," Miller commanded instantly, his hand resting casually but threateningly near his holster. Althea blinked, her expression unreadable. "Am I being detained, officer? I'm waiting for a family member." "I said step out of the vehicle." Miller's voice cracked with unnecessary volume. He was playing to an audience, though the parking lot was mostly empty. "We've had reports of a suspicious vehicle loitering in this area. High-end car, low-end driver. You fit the description." Althea felt the familiar cold burn of adrenaline, the same fuel she used during negotiations in Kabul and tactical briefings in the Situation Room. She suppressed it. "Officer, this is my vehicle. I have identification. There is no need for me to step out." "You're refusing a lawful order," Miller snapped. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, I've got a non-compliant 1015 in the Oak Creek lot. Send backup." Althea sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion rather than fear. "Officer, I am General Althea Robinson of the United States Army. If you check my license plate, you will see this vehicle is registered to me. I suggest you lower your voice and check your data before this escalates." Miller laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. "General, yeah, right. And I'm the King of England. Step out now, or I drag you out." Before Althea could respond, a second cruiser screeched to a halt behind her, blocking her in. Sergeant Hank Davison stepped out. He was older, heavier, with a face that looked like it had been eroded by years of bad coffee and unchecked authority. He waddled over, chewing on a toothpick. "Problem, Miller?" Davison asked, eyeing the Mercedes. "She's claiming she's a general, Sarge, refusing to ID, refusing to exit." Davison leaned down, peering through the window gap. His eyes scanned Althea's hoodie, her natural hair, the lack of visible jewelry. He made a snap judgment. the kind he had been making for 20 years in Oak Creek. "Listen, lady," Davison grunted. "We know how this works. You borrowed the boyfriend's car, you're waiting for a deal to go down, and you think having an attitude is going to make us walk away. Open the door." "I am not borrowing anything," Althea said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming steel. "And I am not lady. I am General Robinson, and you are making a grave error in judgment." "That's it," Miller shouted. He reached through the open gap, unlocking the door manually before Althea could stop him. He ripped the door open. "Get out! Now!" Althea stepped out. She didn't scramble. She unfolded herself with dignity. She stood 5'9", but she projected the height of a skyscraper. She held her hands out slightly, palms open. "I am complying. Check my wallet in the center console. My military ID is—" "Shut up!" Miller spun her around, slamming her chest against the side of her own car. The impact dented the door slightly. "You're under arrest for disorderly conduct, failure to comply, and resisting arrest." "I haven't resisted," Althea stated calmly, though her cheek was pressed against the hot metal. "And you are damaging federal property. This vehicle is leased by the DOD. "Talking back again?" Davison chuckled, pulling out his handcuffs. "Slap the cuffs on her, Miller. Tight. Let's see if she's still a general when she's in the cage." The metal cuffs bit into Althea's wrists. Miller ratcheted them tighter than necessary, pinching the skin. "You are making a mistake," Althea said, her voice devoid of emotion now. "A career-ending mistake." "The only mistake," Miller hissed in her ear as he shoved her toward his cruiser, "was you thinking you could come into Oak Creek and run your mouth." Across the street, Maya stepped out of the law firm just in time to see her aunt being shoved into the back of a police car. She froze, phone in hand, and hit record. The ride to the Oak Creek precinct was short and silent, save for Officer Miller's self-congratulatory humming. He was drumming his fingers on the steering wheel, high on the adrenaline of a good bust. In the rearview mirror, he watched Althea. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She was staring out the window, memorizing the route, analyzing the situation. It unsettled him. Usually, by now, they were screaming or crying. "Quiet back there, General," Miller taunted. "Thinking about which lie to tell the judge?" Althea shifted her gaze to his eyes in the mirror. "I am thinking about the Uniform Code of Military Justice," she said softly. "And I am thinking about how your chief is going to explain this to the Pentagon." "You're delusional," Miller scoffed. They arrived at the station, a brick building that smelled of stale disinfectant and old paper. They hauled Althea out of the car, parading her through the booking area. Other officers looked up, some smirking, others indifferent. It was just another afternoon in Oak Creek. They sat her down on a metal bench, one wrist cuffed to the rail. "Name?" The booking officer, a bored-looking woman named Corporal Haynes, asked without looking up. "General Althea Marie Robinson," Althea said clearly. Haynes paused. She looked up. "Ma'am, give me your real name. I don't have time for games." "That is my real name. If you would have allowed me to retrieve my identification from my vehicle, you would know that." Miller tossed Althea's purse onto the counter. He had grabbed it from the car before the tow truck arrived. "Check it. Let's prove her wrong so we can book her as a Jane Doe, if we have to." Haynes opened the purse. She dug past a pack of gum and a tube of lipstick. Her hand froze when she pulled out a leather wallet with a gold emblem embossed on the front. Department of Defense, United States of America. She flipped it open. The color drained from Haynes's face faster than water from a cracked tub. She stared at the ID card. General. 4 stars. Top secret clearance. "Miller," Haynes whispered. Her voice trembled. "What? Fake ID?" Miller laughed, leaning over the counter. I bet she got it on the internet. Miller, shut up, Haynes hissed. She turned the wallet around. Look. Miller squinted. He read the card. He looked at the photo. He looked at Althea. The woman on the bench was the woman in the photo, just without the dress uniform and the formidable rack of medals that included the Distinguished Service Medal and the Bronze Star. It's a good fake, Miller stammered, the sweat starting to bead on his upper lip. It's got to be. Run the number, Althea commanded from the bench. Her voice cut through the room like a knife. Run the DOD ID number. Do it now. Haynes typed the number into the federal database, her fingers shaking. The screen blinked, then flashed red with a message that rarely appeared in a small-town police station. Restricted personnel. Flag officer. Notify Pentagon immediately. Do not detain. Oh my God, Haynes breathed. She pushed her chair back. Sarge, Davison! Sergeant Davison walked out of his office, holding a jelly donut. What's the commotion? She's real, Haynes squeaked. She's a 4-star general, Sarge. The system just flagged her as a Priority 1 federal asset. Davison dropped the donut. It rolled across the dirty linoleum, unnoticed. He looked at Althea. She hadn't moved. She was watching them with the patience of a predator who knows the trap has already snapped shut. Uncuff her, Davison said, his voice hoarse. Miller, uncuff her now. But she resisted, Miller argued weakly, his world crumbling. Uncuff her, Davison roared. Miller fumbled with the keys, rushing over to the bench. He unlocked the cuff. Althea rubbed her wrist. There was a red welt where the metal had pinched her. She stood up. I'm, sorry about the confusion, ma'am, Davison said, putting on his best good old boy smile. You know how it is. We have to be careful. If you'd just shown us the ID earlier. I tried, Althea said. You threw me against my car. Well, emotions were high. Davison shrugged, trying to minimize it. Tell you what, you're free to go. We'll waive the charges. No harm, no foul, right? Althea stared at him. The silence stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. I want my phone call, she said. Ma'am, you're free to go. You don't need a phone call, Davison said, sweating now. I was arrested, Althea said. I was processed. I was injured. I have the right to a phone call, unless you are denying me my constitutional rights on top of everything else. Davison swallowed hard. He pointed to the phone on the wall. Go ahead. Althea walked to the phone. She didn't dial a lawyer. She didn't dial a bail bondsman. She dialed a number she had memorized years ago, a direct line that bypassed secretaries and aides. It rang twice. This is the office of the secretary, a deep voice answered. This is General Robinson, Althea said. Authorization code Tango Sierra 904. Get me Lloyd. The officers behind the desk exchanged terrified glances. Lloyd? A moment later, a booming voice came on the line. Althea, I thought you were taking a personal day. Is everything all right? Mr. Secretary, Althea said, her voice echoing in the silent police station. I am currently being detained at the Oak Creek Police Department in Virginia. I have been assaulted, profiled, and falsely arrested by Officer Brad Miller and Sergeant Hank Davison. I am requesting immediate extraction and MP support. There was a pause on the line, a pause that felt like the calm before a nuclear blast. Are you injured, General? Minor contusions, nothing I can't handle. But the chain of command here seems to believe they are above the law. Sit tight, Althea, the Secretary of Defense said, his tone turning icy. I'm sending the cavalry. And Althea? Yes, sir. Don't let them leave. Althea hung up the phone. She turned back to the terrified officers. She sat back down on the bench, crossed her legs, and smiled for the first time. I'm not leaving, she said. and neither are you. The silence in the Oak Creek precinct was heavy, suffocating. It was the kind of silence that usually preceded a natural disaster. Officer Brad Miller paced back and forth behind the front desk, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. He kept glancing at the clock, then at the front doors, then at the woman sitting calmly on the bench. General Althea Robinson hadn't moved. She sat with her back straight, hands resting lightly on her knees, watching them. She looked less like a prisoner now, and more like a judge waiting to deliver a verdict. "Sarge, what do we do?" Miller whispered, his voice cracking. She called the Secretary of Defense. She actually called him. "Do you think it was real?" Sergeant Davison was wiping sweat from his forehead with a crumpled napkin. "It's a bluff. It has to be. Nobody just calls the secretary. She probably called her lawyer and put on a show to scare us." "She didn't sound like she was bluffing," Corporal Haynes muttered from her computer. She was staring at the screen, which still flashed the red restricted personnel warning. "And guys, the system just locked me out. I can't access the logs anymore. It says Federal Override Active." Davison's face went pale. "What?" Before he could respond, the heavy glass doors of the station swung open. Chief of Police Gary Reynolds strode in. He was a tall man who carried his weight in his gut, wearing a uniform that was too tight and an expression that was permanently annoyed. "Davison," Reynolds barked, "what is this I hear about a 10:15 involving a federal employee? The mayor just called me. Said someone from the governor's office called him asking why we have a high-ranking military official in custody." Davison scrambled to attention. "Chief, it's a misunderstanding. We have a suspect who resisted arrest. She claims to be a general, and her ID looks real, but she was non-compliant. We were just processing her out." Reynolds looked at Althea. He didn't see a general. He saw a black woman in a hoodie. He scoffed, turning back to Davison. "Well, get her out of here. If she's military, hand her over to the nearest base. I don't want the paperwork." "Chief," Althea spoke up. Her voice was calm, projecting effortlessly across the room. "I am not going anywhere until my transport arrives." Reynolds turned on her, his face reddening. "Listen here, I don't care who you think you are. In my town, you follow my rules. If my officers say you resisted, you resisted. Now take your release papers and get out before I change my mind." "I am General Althea Robinson," she repeated, her eyes locking onto his. "And you have about 3 minutes to prepare your men for what is coming. Threatening a police officer?" Reynolds laughed, stepping closer. "That's another charge." "It's not a threat, Chief," Althea said softly. "It's a tactical update." At that exact moment, the coffee in the mug on Corporal Haynes's desk began to ripple. A low, thrumming vibration started in the floorboards. It grew louder, a deep, rhythmic beating that rattled the windows in their frames. "What the hell is that?" Miller asked, looking around. The sound became deafening. It wasn't thunder. It was the distinctive chopping roar of rotors. Not one helicopter. Multiple. "Look outside!" Haynes screamed, pointing at the front window. Reynolds, Davison, and Miller rushed to the glass. Their jaws dropped, descending onto the police station's parking lot and the adjacent street, blocking all traffic, were 3 Black Hawk helicopters, their dark fuselages gleaming in the Virginia sun. The wind from their rotors kicked up a dust storm, blasting sand against the station windows. Simultaneously, a convoy of 4 black armored SUVs and 2 military Humvees screeched around the corner, lights flashing. They didn't use sirens. They didn't need to. They tore over the curb, surrounding the station entrance in a defensive phalanx. "Oh my God!" Davison whispered. "It wasn't a bluff." Doors on the vehicles flew open. Dozens of soldiers poured out. These weren't standard infantry. They were military police, clad in full tactical gear, body armor, and carrying M4 carbines. They moved with terrifying precision, setting up a perimeter around the station in seconds. The front doors of the station were kicked open, not just opened, but slammed back against the stops with such force that the glass cracked. Entering the room first were 4 soldiers, weapons at the low ready, scanning the room. "Federal operation! Hands where we can see them, now!" one of them bellowed. Miller and Davison threw their hands up instantly. Even Chief Reynolds, stunned into submission, raised his hands. Walking through the phalanx of soldiers was a man in a crisp army dress uniform. Colonel Sterling, a JAG, Judge Advocate General, officer with a face carved from granite. Beside him walked a woman in a dark suit. Special Agent Thorne from the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. Colonel Sterling scanned the room, his eyes passing over the terrified police officers as if they were furniture. He landed on Althea. He marched over to the bench, snapped his heels together, and rendered a sharp, perfect salute. "General Robinson," Sterling said, his voice crisp. "Colonel Sterling, JAG Corps. We are here to secure you, ma'am." Althea stood up slowly. She returned the salute casually. "At ease, Colonel. Took you long enough." "Traffic, ma'am," Sterling apologized. He turned slowly to face the police officers. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Who is the senior officer in command here?" Chief Reynolds stepped forward, his hands shaking slightly. I am. Chief Gary Reynolds. "Now look here. You can't just storm a municipal building like—" "I am invoking Article 9 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice regarding the detainment of high-value assets during a time of national security sensitivity," Sterling cut him off, making up legalese that sounded terrifyingly plausible to the confused chief. "Furthermore, this is now a federal crime scene. Officer, secure their weapons." 2 MPs stepped forward and stripped Reynolds, Davison, and Miller of their sidearms. "Hey, you can't do that," Miller yelped. "You arrested a 4-star general regarding a strategic briefing she was carrying on her person," Special Agent Thorne said, stepping forward. She held up a tablet. "We have reason to believe you have compromised national security by seizing her vehicle and personal effects. Until we clear this station, you are all under federal custody." "Compromised? What?" Davison stammered. It was a traffic stop." "Where is the general's vehicle?" Thorne demanded. "Impound," Miller squeaked. "It was towed." Althea stepped forward, rubbing her wrist. She walked past Miller, stopping inches from his face. He flinched. "You wanted to see if I was still a general when I was in the cage, Officer Miller," Althea said quietly. "I am. Now, let's see if you're still a police officer when you're in yours." She turned to Colonel Sterling. "Colonel, I want a full sweep. I want their body cam footage, their dash cam footage, and the station surveillance logs secured immediately before accidents happen. Agent Thorne, I want you to look into the arrest records of this precinct. If they did this to me, imagine what they've been doing to people who can't call the Pentagon." "Yes, General," Sterling and Thorne said in unison. "And Colonel?" Althea added, glancing at the terrified Davison. "I'd like a coffee now. Black." The takeover of the Oak Creek police station was absolute. Within an hour, the small municipal building had been transformed into a temporary command post for the Department of Defense. The local dispatcher had been relieved of duty, replaced by an Army communications specialist. The back exit was guarded by 2 MPs who looked like they could bench press the chief's car. General Althea Robinson sat in the chief's office, which Chief Reynolds had been unceremoniously vacated from, reviewing files on a secure laptop. She wasn't just angry, she was methodical. She knew that anger burned out, but dismantling a corrupt system required cold, hard data. Outside the office, in the main bullpen, The atmosphere was grim for the Oak Creek officers. Miller and Davison were separated, seated at opposite ends of the room, each guarded by a soldier. They weren't in handcuffs yet, but the threat hung heavy in the air. Special Agent Thorne approached Miller first. She pulled up a chair and sat backward on it, staring him down. "Officer Miller," she began, her voice deceptively light. "I'm looking at the timestamp of your body camera footage. It seems to cut out right after you put the general in the car. Why is that?" Miller swallowed hard. "Battery died. Old equipment. We've been asking for upgrades for months." Thorne smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Funny, because our tech team just pulled the logs from the server. The camera didn't die. It was manually switched off. And then, 10 minutes ago, someone tried to access the server from the terminal at the front desk to delete the file permanently." Miller's eyes darted to Corporal Haynes, who was currently crying quietly in the corner while being questioned by another agent. I don't know anything about that," Miller lied. "We recovered the footage, Miller." Thorne dropped the hammer. "We have audio and video of you taunting the general. We have you slamming her against the car. We have you ignoring her identification. And we have the sergeant telling you to make it tight." Thorne leaned in close. "Do you know what the penalty is for deprivation of rights under color of law? It's a federal felony. And since you assaulted a high-ranking military officer, we're looking at additional charges. You're looking at 20 years, Brad, unless you want to talk about the sergeant." Miller looked at Davison across the room. Davison was sweating profusely, arguing with Colonel Sterling. Miller realized in that moment that the Brotherhood of the Badge was flimsy when facing the United States Army. "Davison told me to profile the car," Miller blurted out. He said anyone driving a car that nice around here is either a drug dealer or a prostitute. He told me to find a reason to pull her over." Thorne tapped her tablet, recording everything. "Go on." Meanwhile, outside the station, the situation was spiraling out of control in a different way. Maya, Althea's niece, hadn't just recorded the arrest. She had live-streamed it. The video, titled "Racist Cops Assault U.S. Army General," had been up for 2 hours. It had 3 million views. The internet was on fire. The video showed Althea's calm demeanor contrasted with Miller's aggression. It showed the slam against the car. It showed the handcuffs. But the kicker was the comment section, where eagle-eyed viewers had identified Althea's rank before the news even broke. A General Jane was trending #1 worldwide. Though Althea hated the moniker, news vans began to arrive, parking just outside the perimeter established by the MPs. CNN, Fox, MSNBC. They were all there, filming the surreal sight of Black Hawk helicopters parked next to a small-town donut shop. Inside the chief's office, Colonel Sterling knocked on the doorframe. "General, you need to see this." Althea looked up. "What is it, Colonel?" Sterling placed a file on the desk. Agent Thorne dug into the precinct's archives. "It's worse than we thought. This isn't an isolated incident. Sergeant Davison has 42 excessive force complaints in the last 10 years. Not one was sustained. They were all dismissed by Chief Reynolds." Althea flipped through the file. Photos of bruised faces, reports of resisting arrest that mirrored her own, and civil asset forfeiture forms where the police seized cash and cars without charges. "They run this town like a fiefdom," Althea murmured. "They target people who can't fight back. Transients, minorities, students. They picked the wrong target today," Sterling said grimly. "Yes." Althea closed the file. "But Colonel, if I just destroy them for what they did to me, it's revenge. If I destroy them for what they did to everyone else, it's justice." She stood up. "Bring Chief Reynolds in here, and bring the sergeant. I want to look them in the eye before I hand this over to the DOJ. 5 minutes later, Reynolds and Davison were marched into the office. Reynolds looked deflated, his authority stripped away by the presence of federal power. Davison looked sick. "Chief Reynolds," Althea said, standing behind his desk, "I've been reviewing your internal affairs logs, or rather, the lack of them." "General, look," Reynolds started, his voice shaking. "We police our own. We have a tough job. Sometimes things get rough." "Things get rough?" Althea threw the file onto the desk. It slid across and hit Reynolds in the stomach. "This isn't rough. This is criminal enterprise disguised as law enforcement. You have systematized the violation of civil liberties for profit and power." "You can't prove that," Davison muttered. Althea pointed to the laptop. "I have the emails, Sergeant. Your Corporal Haynes gave up the passwords about 5 minutes after Agent Thorne mentioned conspiracy charges. We have the emails where you joke about taxing out-of-towners. We have the emails where you discuss destroying evidence." Reynolds's knees buckled. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. "The Department of Justice is sending a Civil Rights Division team down here," Althea continued. "They will be here in an hour. They are going to audit every arrest you've made in 20 years. But before they get here, I have one question." She walked around the desk, stopping in front of Davison. "Why?" she asked. "Why me? I was polite. I was compliant. I was calm. Why did you feel the need to escalate it?" Davison looked up, his eyes full of hate and fear. "Because you didn't look like you belonged," he spat out, a last shred of defiance. "You didn't look like a general. You looked like—" He stopped, realizing he was digging his grave deeper. "Say it," Althea whispered. "I looked like a black woman in a nice car, and that offended you." Davison didn't answer. "Get them out of my sight," Althea commanded. "And Colonel, make sure the press sees them being walked out. If they want to be famous, let's make them famous." Sterling nodded to the MPs. "Cuff them." For the second time that day, handcuffs clicked in the Oak Creek station. But this time, they were on the wrists of Sergeant Hank Davison and Chief Gary Reynolds. As they were dragged out of the office, Althea walked to the window. She saw the news crews outside. She saw Maya standing by the police tape, waving her phone. Althea took a deep breath. The battle was won, but the war was just starting. She picked up her phone. "Get me the Pentagon press secretary," she said. "I'm going to make a statement." The Virginia sun was beginning to dip, casting long, bruised shadows across the asphalt of the Oak Creek Police Department parking lot. The perimeter established by the military police had pushed the chaos back to the street, but the noise was deafening. It wasn't just news vans anymore. It was the community. Hundreds of locals, drawn by the sight of Black Hawks and the viral video of the arrest, had gathered. They stood behind the yellow tape, watching the fall of a regime that had held them down for decades. General Althea Robinson stood just inside the shattered glass doors, adjusting her cuffs. She had declined a change of clothes brought by an aide. She wanted the world to see her in the grey hoodie and joggers. She wanted them to see that respectability wasn't about a uniform. It was about the person. "General, the press pool is ready," Colonel Sterling said, listening to his earpiece. "CNN is broadcasting live. We also have a representative from the governor's office, State Attorney General Michael P. Sullivan, who is demanding a word before you speak." Althea's eyes narrowed. "Sullivan? He's been protecting these small-town departments for years. Send him in." A moment later, Michael Sullivan burst through the doors, flanked by 2 state troopers who looked pitifully under-equipped compared to the federal MPs guarding the hallway. Sullivan was a man who wore expensive suits to hide a cheap soul. He looked flustered. "General Robinson," Sullivan said, extending a hand that Althea ignored. This has gone too far. You have federal troops occupying a municipal building. This is a jurisdiction nightmare. I am ordering you to stand down and hand over the investigation to the state police." Althea looked at him with the same detached interest one might show a cockroach. "Mr. Sullivan, you seem to be under the misapprehension that this is a negotiation." "This is the Commonwealth of Virginia," Sullivan blustered, his face flushing. "You can't just annex a police station because your feelings were hurt during a traffic stop." "My feelings are irrelevant," Althea said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly low register. "This station is now a secured federal crime scene. We have uncovered evidence of a conspiracy to violate Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code. We have evidence of racketeering, wire fraud, and the kidnapping of a federal officer. That puts this squarely in the jurisdiction of the FBI and the DOD." Sullivan sneered. "Kidnapping? That's a stretch, General. It was an arrest. An unlawful arrest of a high-ranking military official carrying classified intelligence constitutes a hostile act," Althea countered. "And frankly, Mr. Attorney General, given the emails we found on Chief Reynolds's server linking his asset forfeiture fund to your re-election campaign, I suggest you step out of my way before I have Colonel Sterling add you to the indictment list." The blood drained from Sullivan's face. He opened his mouth, closed it, and stepped back. The threat wasn't a bluff, and he knew it. "I thought so," Althea said. She turned to Sterling. "Let's go outside." Althea walked out of the station. The roar of the crowd dipped, then swelled into applause. She stepped up to the podium that had been hastily set up by the Army Press Corps. Dozens of microphones were shoved toward her face. She waited for silence. It took 30 seconds, but eventually the crowd hushed. "My name is General Althea Robinson," she began, her voice steady and amplified across the lot. "3 hours ago, I was profiled, assaulted, and handcuffed by officers of this department. They told me I didn't belong. They told me I was talking back when I asserted my constitutional rights." She paused, looking directly into the camera lens of the lead newsfeed. "They made a mistake, but not the mistake they think. Their mistake wasn't arresting a general. Their mistake was thinking that the badge on their chest gave them the right to treat anyone the way they treated me. If they will do this to a 4-star general, what have they been doing to the teachers, the nurses, the students, and the workers of this town?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "Tell 'em!" "I am not just here to clear my name," Althea continued, her voice rising with controlled passion. "I am here to announce that the Department of Justice, in coordination with the Department of Defense, is launching a full forensic audit of the Oak Creek Police Department. Every arrest, every ticket, every seizure of property for the last 10 years will be reviewed." Cheers erupted. Althea raised a hand. "Tonight, Chief Reynolds and Sergeant Davison have been relieved of duty and are currently in federal custody. But this is not just about 2 men. It is about a culture of impunity. And tonight, that culture ends." As she stepped back from the podium, the crowd went wild. But Althea wasn't looking at them. She was looking at the side of the building, where 2 MPs were escorting Sergeant Hank Davison into the back of an armored transport vehicle. Davison looked up. He saw the crowd cheering for his downfall. He saw the cameras broadcasting his shame. And then he saw Althea. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply offered him a small, sharp salute, a mocking mirror of the authority he used to wield. Davison lowered his head, the defeat absolute. The doors of the armored truck slammed shut, sealing him in darkness. Inside the station, however, the drama was far from over. Officer Brad Miller, terrified and watching the live stream of the general's speech on his phone, decided he didn't want to go down with the ship. "Agent Thorne," Miller shouted from his chair, "I want to make a deal. I can tell you where the money is." Special Agent Thorne didn't believe in coincidences, and she didn't believe in clean getaways. She sat across from Officer Brad Miller in the interrogation room, formerly the break room, now stripped of its coffee machine and donuts. "Talk fast, Miller," Thorne said, tapping her pen on the metal table. "The Civil Rights Division lawyers just landed at Dulles Airport. Once they get here, my ability to offer you leniency evaporates." Miller was shaking. He was young, stupid and weak, a dangerous combination with a badge, but a useful one without it. "Davison and Reynolds, they have a place," Miller stammered. "They call it the Locker. It's not at the station. It's a storage unit out on Route 9, Unit 404. "What's in the unit, Miller?" "Everything," Miller whispered. "Cash they seized from drug busts that they never reported. Jewelry. But worse stuff, too." "Define worse," Thorne said, her eyes cold. "Throwdowns," Miller admitted, tears leaking from his eyes. "Baggies of cocaine, unregistered handguns with the serial numbers filed off. Stuff they use, stuff we use, to plant on suspects if they don't have anything on them. If someone gives Davison attitude, or if they want to seize a nice car, but don't have probable cause, Davison says, 'Go get a party favor from the Locker.'" Thorne stood up so abruptly, her chair screeched against the floor. "You're telling me they planted evidence to frame innocent citizens?" "Yes," Miller sobbed. "I can give you names. The kid from the university last year. Marcus. He didn't have drugs. Davison hated his dad. We planted an ounce of heroin in his backpack. He's doing 10 years. Thorne walked out of the room. She found General Robinson in the hallway, reviewing a tactical map with Colonel Sterling. "General," Thorne said, her voice tight with suppressed rage. "We need a warrant for a storage unit on Route 9, and we need to cut the feed to the press. What we're about to find, it's going to burn this town to the ground." An hour later, a convoy of black SUVs pulled up to the rusted gate of the secure all-self-storage facility. The owner, a man named Pete, who looked like he'd been asleep for a decade, hurriedly unlocked the gate when he saw the MP holding an assault rifle. They cut the lock on Unit 404. General Robinson stood back as the agents rolled up the metal door. The smell hit them first: musty air, old cash, and gun oil. Inside, the unit was stacked floor to ceiling with boxes. It looked like a hoarder's paradise, but the labels told a sinister story. Case 2023-45, cash, case 2024-12, watches, ops kit, candy. Thorne put on latex gloves and opened the box, marked candy. It was filled with small, pre-packaged bags of white powder. Evidence bags that had been pre-sealed, waiting for a victim. Next to it was a box of handguns, cheap Saturday night specials and Glocks with scratched-off serial numbers. "Dear God," Colonel Sterling murmured, "this is an industrial-scale frame-up operation." Althea walked into the unit. She picked up a file lying on top of a stack. It was a photo of a young black man, a student ID, and a police report signed by Sergeant Davison. Suspect: Marcus J. Thorne. Charge: possession with intent to distribute. Evidence found in vehicle. Althea stared at the photo. The boy looked terrified. He looked like he had a bright future that had been snatched away because a man like Davison felt like exercising power. "Colonel," Althea said, her voice shaking with a rare display of emotion, "I want every single box catalogued. I want fingerprints lifted from every baggie, and I want the DOJ to pull the file on Marcus Thorne immediately. If he is in prison, I want him out by morning." "It will be done, General," Sterling promised. "And find out who the judge was," Althea added. "You don't run an operation this big without a judge signing off on the warrants. Miller said Sullivan was involved. Find the link." Back at the station, the unraveling was accelerating. The blue wall of silence had crumbled into a panic of self-preservation. With Miller talking, other officers started coming forward. They spilled secrets about ticket quotas, about racial targeting instructions written on whiteboards that were erased before shifts ended, about overtime paid for arrests that never happened. But the biggest twist came from a forensic accountant the DOD had flown in. "General," the accountant said, walking into the command center with a laptop. "I traced the cash flow from the unlogged seizures. It doesn't just go to Reynolds or Sullivan." "Where does it go?" Althea asked. "It goes to a shell company called Blue Shield Consulting," the accountant said. "The registered agent for that company is a woman named Catherine Davison." Althea raised an eyebrow. "The sergeant's wife?" "Yes. But here is the kicker. Catherine Davison isn't just a housewife. She's the chief clerk for the county court. She controls the docket. She assigns the judges. She ensures that every fake arrest Davison makes lands in front of Judge Abernathy, who happens to be her brother. The web was complete. It wasn't just a rogue cop. It was a family business. The cop arrested them. The wife processed them. The brother-in-law convicted them, and the Attorney General looked the other way while they split the seized assets. Althea felt a cold fury settle in her gut. This was feudalism. This was a mafia with badges. "Arrest them all," Althea commanded. "Get a warrant for Catherine Davison. Get a warrant for Judge Abernathy. I want the MPs at the courthouse within 20 minutes. If they are in the middle of a trial, I don't care. Drag them off the bench." "General," Sterling cautioned, "arresting a sitting judge? That's justice," Althea cut him off. "Do it!" The sun had set, but the lights of the police station were blazing. Althea sat in the chief's office, exhausted. She looked at her phone. The video of her arrest had 50 million views. The president had tweeted about accountability. There was a knock on the door. It wasn't a soldier. It was a civilian woman, middle-aged, wearing a worn-out nurse's uniform. She looked terrified to be surrounded by soldiers, but her eyes were determined. "General," the MP at the door said, "this is Mrs. Thorne. She says she's Marcus's mother. She saw the news." Althea stood up immediately. "Let her in." Mrs. Thorne walked in, her hands clutching a purse like a shield. She looked at Althea, the woman who had done in 6 hours what Mrs. Thorne had been trying to do for 2 years. "Is it true?" Mrs. Thorne whispered. "Did you find it? The proof?" Althea walked around the desk. She didn't offer a handshake. She reached out and took the woman's hands. "We found it," Althea said softly. "Officer Miller confessed. They planted the drugs, Mrs. Thorne. We have the box they took it from. We have the logs." Mrs. Thorne's legs gave out. Althea caught her, holding the sobbing woman up. "He's a good boy," Mrs. Thorne cried into the general's hoodie. "He was on the dean's list. They took his scholarship. They took his life." "We're getting it back," Althea promised, her own eyes misting. "The DOJ is drafting the release order now. He's coming home, Mrs. Thorne." Althea looked over Mrs. Thorne's shoulder at the window. She saw the reflection of her own face, stern, tired, powerful. She had called the Pentagon to save herself, but looking at this weeping mother, she realized that the universe had put her in that parking lot for a different reason. It wasn't an inconvenience. It was a divine assignment. "Colonel Sterling," Althea said over the woman's sobs, her voice turning to iron. "Yes, General. When we arrest the judge, make sure he's wearing his robes. I want the world to see what corruption looks like when it's stripped of its dignity. Consider it done." The phone on the chief's desk rang. It was the private line. Althea picked it up. "Oak Creek Command Post. General Robinson speaking." "Althea," The voice on the other end was icy and familiar. It was Governor William Thorne, no relation to Marcus. "You've made your point. You've destroyed the careers of good men. Now, call off your dogs before you embarrass the state any further." Althea laughed. It was a dark, dangerous sound. "Governor," she said, "I haven't even started. I just found a wire transfer from Blue Shield Consulting to your re-election, Pesci. The FBI is on their way to the governor's mansion. I suggest you put on a tie. It's going to be a long night." She hung up the phone before he could respond. The karma wasn't just hitting back. It was dropping a nuclear bomb. The raid on the Oak Creek County Courthouse happened with the precision of a surgical strike. At 9:08 a.m., just as Judge Abernathy was banging his gavel to open the session, the double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. It wasn't the bailiff. It was Colonel Sterling, flanked by 4 federal agents and a squad of MPs. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Abernathy, a man with silver hair and a face that feigned benevolence, peered over his spectacles. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" "Judge Thomas Abernathy," Sterling announced, his voice booming off the mahogany walls. "You are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, and judicial fraud." "This is my courtroom," Abernathy shouted, standing up, his robes billowing. "You have no authority here." "Your authority ended the moment you signed a warrant based on evidence you knew was planted by your brother-in-law," Sterling replied, walking up the aisle. From the clerk's desk, Catherine Davison, Sergeant Davison's wife, bolted. She tried to run toward the judge's chambers, but Agent Thorne was faster. She intercepted Catherine, spinning her around and slapping handcuffs on her wrists before she could even scream. "Catherine Davison," Thorne said, "we have the bank records. We know about Blue Shield Consulting. It's over." Up on the bench, Judge Abernathy looked for an escape. Seeing none, he slumped back into his leather chair, the fight draining out of him. The MPs ascended the bench. They didn't treat him with the reverence he was used to. They pulled him up, spun him around, and cuffed him over his judicial robes. As they marched him out past the stunned gallery, the symbolism was potent. The man who had sent hundreds of innocent people to prison was now walking the same path. Simultaneously, at the governor's mansion in Richmond, the FBI was executing a search warrant. Governor Thorne's immunity didn't cover federal RICO charges. The news helicopters captured the footage of the governor being escorted into a black sedan, his political career vaporized in an instant. 2 days later, the gates of the Virginia State Correctional Facility buzzed open. General Althea Robinson stood by her car, the same black Mercedes that had started it all, now repaired. Beside her stood Mrs. Thorne. A young man walked out. He was thin, his eyes haunted, wearing a grey tracksuit that was too big for him. It was Marcus. When he saw his mother, he broke into a run. They collided in a hug that seemed to shake the earth. Althea watched, tears streaming down her face behind her sunglasses. This was the victory. Not the arrests, not the headlines, but this restoration. Marcus pulled away and looked at the woman in the hoodie, standing next to his mum. Are you the general?" Althea smiled. "I'm just Althea, Marcus. Welcome home." "Thank you," he whispered, gripping her hand. "They told me I was never getting out. They told me nobody cared." "They were wrong," Althea said. "Now go get a good meal. You have a scholarship to finish." The courtroom was packed, but this time the roles were reversed. Sergeant Hank Davison sat at the defense table, wearing an orange jumpsuit. He looked 20 years older. The arrogant bully who had chewed on toothpicks and terrorized a town was gone, replaced by a broken man terrified of the general population. The evidence against him was insurmountable. Officer Miller's testimony, the locker raid, the financial trail, and the body cam footage of Althea's arrest painted a picture of a monster. The federal judge, a woman with eyes like flint, read the sentence. Hank Davison, for your role as the ringleader of a criminal enterprise operating under the guise of law enforcement, and for the systemic violation of the civil rights of the citizens of Oak Creek, I sentence you to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Davison put his head on the table and wept. Chief Reynolds received 30 years. Judge Abernathy received 25 years. Catherine Davison received 15 years. Officer Brad Miller, due to his cooperation, received 10 years. Karma hadn't just hit back, it had leveled the playing field. Outside the courthouse, Althea walked down the steps, surrounded by reporters. She wasn't wearing her army uniform. She was wearing a sharp civilian suit. "General Robinson! General!" a reporter shouted. "Now that the trial is over, are you returning to the Pentagon? There are rumors you're up for a promotion to the Joint Chiefs." Althea stopped. She looked at the cameras. "No," she said. "I submitted my retirement papers last week." The press corps gasped. "Retiring? Why?" Althea looked at the crowd. She saw Marcus Thorne in the back, holding a sign that said, "Justice." She saw the citizens of Oak Creek, finally breathing free. "I spent 30 years fighting enemies abroad to protect American freedoms," Althea said. "But that day in the parking lot taught me that the most dangerous enemies of freedom are sometimes wearing badges right here at home. I'm retiring from the army so I can start a new mission." "What mission is that?" "I'm launching the Robinson Initiative," Althea announced, "a legal defense fund and investigative task force dedicated to rooting out corruption in small-town police departments across America. We're going to find every Davison, every Reynolds, and every Abernathy hiding in the shadows, and we are going to shine a light on them." She put on her sunglasses. "Because nobody," she added, a faint smile playing on her lips, "should ever be told they don't belong." She got into her car. As she drove away, the engine hummed, a sound of power, precision, and unstoppable momentum. The war was over. The crusade had just begun. And that is how one arrogant mistake dismantled an entire empire of corruption. They thought they were arresting a nobody in a hoodie, but they ended up handcuffing the one woman who had the power to burn their world down. Davison and his crew are now sitting in federal prison, and Marcus is back in college where he belongs. It's a powerful reminder. Never judge a book by its cover, and never, ever assume that silence is weakness. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one holding the grenade pin. If you enjoyed this story of massive karma and justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories like this, where the underdog wins and the corrupt get what they deserve, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. What would you have done if you were in General Robinson's shoes? Would you have revealed your rank immediately, or let them dig their own grave? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.